Good morning and welcome to the Georgia Gang on this Sunday, June 21st, and a happy Father's Day to all the dads watching. Political outsider Rick Jackson pulls off one of the biggest upsets in Georgia history. Also, Congressman Mike Collins wins the GOP Senate nomination and sets up a high-stakes fall showdown. And the special legislative session takes a dramatic turn. Kathy, Phil, Theron, and Brian are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Rick Jackson spent more than $100 million of his own money to beat Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in Tuesday's Republican runoff for governor. Jackson won despite the fact that President Trump and Governor Kemp both backed Jones. The healthcare executive will now face Democratic nominee Keisha Lance Bottoms in November, setting up what could be the most consequential governor's race Georgia has seen in a generation. So, Brian, I will let you have the floor first. You work, as we've told everybody, you work for the Jackson campaign. We have to disclose that. You took quite a few political hits, but I was trying to also do the math because I covered you as a journalist. This is 3 out of 5 Republican nominations that you've worked on.
The last three of the last 5, yeah, that's right. I guess so. And, you know, I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to work not only with great leaders, but with great men, with Nathan Deal and with Rick Jackson. And I always thought Nathan Deal was the right man for Georgia's future. I think we can all agree he left the state better than he found it, and I think Rick Jackson will too. And this is a great win for the state, and it is an honor to have been a part of it. Did I take some hits? Certainly, but enough about Phil. Just kidding, buddy. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Little light humor.
I am very thankful to be through the primary. It is very difficult for all of us because it is a family feud. The people who are attacking you are people you know and have known a long time, people you've worked with in the past and will work with in the future. I think the messages of unity after a particularly bitter battle this week have been assuring that Republicans now have their eye on the prize. The target is now Keisha Lance Bottoms. And I think that Tuesday we're all going to put behind us and look toward November.
Theron, this was quite a win for Rick Jackson.
Yeah, congratulations to Rick Jackson on an enormous win. And it's significant, Lori, for 2 reasons. One, he was an outsider. I mean, we remember this was the best kept secret that we've seen in Georgia politics. He comes in right away, labels himself as an outsider. But Burt Jones had the Trump endorsement. But, I mean, it was a delicate dance in the Jackson campaign to figure out a way to not get the endorsement for Trump, but to give him money to make sure that you did everything to try to keep him out of your race. The second thing that was very interesting, for him to be a first-time candidate statewide, he showed a lot of message discipline. Besides the one sort of debate moment where Burt Jones capitalized on and a recording, I mean, Rick Jackson ran a pretty good campaign. But everything changed on Tuesday. You saw Keisha Lance Bottoms right away go to the airwaves, go to social media, and label this as a billionaire, MAGA sort of right-wing nominee who is going to try to buy the general election, like she's saying bought the primary election. But I think that this race is going to be very interesting because he is an outsider, he's new, doesn't have a voting record, but there are some things that happened during the campaign that I think Democrats will be able to capitalize on. And then to B-Rob's point, you definitely saw Republicans right away try to come together.
Well, let's talk about that Republican unity, Phil, because there was a lot of bad blood between the Jones supporters and the Jackson supporters. I mean, you even called Rick Jackson an embarrassment on this show. So how does the Republican Party now come together, and when do we hear from Burt Jones?
Well, I think that first, congratulations to Rick Jackson and Nick Ayers and the whole team and what's his name here. And I think
Some light humor.
Yes, and I think that there will be unity to answer your question. I think there'll be an interesting alliance, and it's already forming, according to my sources, with President Trump and his people, and with Governor Kemp. We'll talk about that more, I'm sure, and also with. I think probably the Collins campaign is going to be heavily involved, and of course the Jackson folks. So there you have the 4 main players that we'll all be looking at for unity. And I will say that remember Rick Jackson lost on May 19th, and so he made that up. Turnout, as we've all commented on, is very important, and they did get the turnout. And so I think that it'll be interesting, too. You mentioned, Theron, about the role of President Trump. I got a kick out of the president's 2 sons said they were supporting Rick Jackson, and whereas the president, of course, endorsed Burt Jones. Jones did a good race. I think he will be a team player down the road, but I'm optimistic for the Republicans in the fall campaign.
Kathy, now the question for Democrats is, what is Keisha Lance Bottoms' path to the governor's mansion? We heard some messaging already about the billionaire, the political outsider, but does that story stick because of Rick's upbringing? I mean, he came from foster care, he came from nothing and worked his way into a billionaire status.
Yeah, well, Keisha Lance Bottoms, I think her boys are all adopted children that she and her husband took into their home. So I think she can kind of match the story of compassion and taking care of kids. And she understands that. I think her challenge is to be very disciplined, to your point, Phil, on the messaging. And, as long as we have a president who continues to take this country down a very bad rabbit hole, which I don't see us recovering from in October, he's not going to be the whole message because Georgia has a lot of needs and a lot of things people need to focus on. But Rick Jackson, right out of the box, talked about Medicare, being something he doesn't care about. I mean, Medicaid expansion, and that's a critical issue for hospitals around the country and around the state. Sorry, I can't even talk this morning. But I think that he's not off to a good start in terms of addressing things people care about, and the fact that he has incredible wealth and can buy this seat is something that both Democrats and I think independents in this country are getting tired of.
All right, let's move on and talk about Governor Brian Kemp. I mean, he stayed neutral for months in this race, said he was only focused on the Senate race, endorsing the political outsider Derek Dooley. Then in the 11th hour, turns around and endorses the political insider Burt Jones in the governor's race. Phil, what do you think led to this endorsement? Because it was quite a shock. The governor took a lot of criticism. I mean, many people pointing out he went 0-2 when Derek Dooley lost as well in the Senate race.
Right. It was a shock or surprise to a lot of people, especially people in the Kemp camp. I think that it all started back with when he wanted Derek Dooley to run in the primary. And I always thought that was a mistake, along with a lot of Republicans, and it was a waste of money and time. And the governor spent a lot of his political capital, which governors really shouldn't do, especially with a special session coming up. And it's damaged his legacy, to be honest about it. I think he's still going to be a major player, however, in the fall campaign, as I mentioned a minute ago. But I think overall, the endorsement of Burt Jones on a Sunday, if he was going to do it, why not a week or two before? That's what everybody's asking. I've never understood it. I think that perhaps behind the scenes, he was talking with Trump people and he was trying to hedge his bets, and it didn't work.
Theron, what do you think about the governor's endorsement at the last minute?
I mean, I think Phil and Brian will have more insights than I would as far as the Republican sort of circles. But to Phil's point, when I woke up, or I think I was somewhere, and I got the message that he was endorsing, the first thing I did, I was like, all right, let me make sure this is real, like this is actual official. But then once it was confirmed that it was real, okay, so then what is he going to do from Sunday until Tuesday to help get the vote out? But back to I think the one thing that probably Burt Jones' campaign thought could happen is that Brian Kemp could help with a lot of those Raffensperger car voters. But we heard from the Jackson campaign, B. Rob said it over and over again, they felt very strong going into early voting. And so it was just really interesting that the governor would come out on a Sunday and not have enough time to really do what he's been able to do best around the state, and that is turn out his loyal support of Republican voters. But it didn't work this time.
The Governor Kemp turned around right away and endorsed Rick Jackson. So did former Governor Sonny Perdue, also former Governor Nathan Deal, Brian.
Absolutely. Again, that show of unity that I was talking about. And look, obviously, I have an emotional stake as well as a professional stake in all of this. And Sunday was a rough day for me. I had a lot of emotions about that at that moment, as Theron was texting me about it. And but at the end of the day, I'll say this: in hindsight, now that we know how everything turned out, we see the impact of Kemp's endorsement. Rick Jackson crushed early voting. I mean, when those numbers started coming in, I'm sure that there were howls of fear going on in Jackson, Georgia at the Burt Jones campaign, because Jackson was winning by such big margins. The election day margins, however, closed that lead for Rick Jackson real quickly, and I think that was partly because of the Kemp endorsement. It did matter. Kemp's got to use that power, that influence to help Rick Jackson in November, to help the whole state. On the Senate race, it was too late to get involved in the summer of 2025. Two congressmen were already in the race.
Real quickly, okay.
I think that the Jackson folks need to get with the Jones folks, because we all are going to need those Burt Jones voters. And in fact, he did very good on actually election day. He didn't do well in the early voting, to your point.
Yes.
All right, up next, the U.S. Senate showdown is also set. Incumbent Senator Jon Ossoff will face Congressman Mike Collins.
Question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Congressman Mike Collins defeated former football coach Derek Dooley for the Republican U.S. Senate nomination, setting up a November race against incumbent Jon Ossoff. Collins ran with Trump's endorsement and led throughout the campaign despite an ongoing House ethics investigation and some controversial social media posts. He's now the Republican best positioned to challenge one of the nation's most watched Senate seats. So Theron, Ossoff already came out swinging Tuesday night, calling Collins an extremist who's also under federal investigation. How nasty and how expensive will this race get?
Well, it's going to be very expensive, and I think it will have moments of being nasty. But both of these men have got to figure out a way to pivot, like Rick Jackson and Keisha Lance Bottoms, to the center in the middle. Now, I'm proud of Jon Ossoff for doing what he did. Phil and I were on election night, and I predicted even before the polls closed, I said, you're going to see Jon Ossoff come out right away, whether it's Mike Collins or Derek Dooley, and attack. And man, did he attack. I mean, he called him a bigot. He said he was an anti-Semite. And these are Jon Ossoff's words, not mine, we'll be very clear. But he also talked about how there's some votes there that he feels that Mike Collins has voted on that's going to hurt Georgia voters when it comes to insurance. And then the last thing he talked about was the investigation, which we heard a little bit about during the primary. So these are all things that Ossoff's campaign is going to actually be on the attack. But then you'll see Mike Collins respond pretty quickly. And I think the Ossoff campaign will go back a little bit more towards the moderate center sort of posture. But man, he's fired up and he's ready to go.
They are fired up, Phil.
Well, several points. The polls showed Collins always ahead, and it's amazing to me, just as a political scientist would tell you, he hardly had any television. And yet he's a great retail politician, and the Republican clubs around the state support him. Mike Collins did very well in Metro Atlanta. If you look at the counties, it's a wonderful surprise. So he's a big player in this unity that we're talking about in the fall. I thought it was outrageous. I had to debate there on election night. What Ossoff did is a vicious personal attack, calling him an anti-Semite. I don't hear Ossoff, criticizing that Plattner fellow, his Democrat in Maine, who's a blatant anti-Semite, or at least a sympathizer, Nazi sympathizer with his tattoo. Ossoff doesn't say anything about that. But to start with that tone, to have a personal attack, is terrible. I think that and I would say that on the other side too. We've got to tone it down. But congratulations to Collins and his team.
Kathy.
Well, to the Plattner thing, that's not who Ossoff is running against. So he's not. He's not going to
condemn it.
Well, no, he shouldn't.
Doesn't do it.
He's just going to leave Maine with Maine. Maine can go do Maine.
He's a coward.
No, he's not a coward. He stands up and he talks the truth. And I think Ossoff has done a really masterful job of representing Georgia. I think he has stayed in the middle. I think he reads the tea leaves really well. He's raised good money. And, frankly, on the Republican side, all three of those candidates, none of them were any good, right? I mean, if I were Ossoff and I woke up, the other day, I would be like, yes, I got the most crazy one of all of them to run against, and I think he's going to take it home. I feel really good about it.
Brian, a lot of folks do compliment Ossoff's constituent services, that he runs a really tight ship there and does really good work. Could this be an instance where we could see a split ticket, that Ossoff wins but Rick Jackson wins also?
Look, in today's tribal nature of the electorate, it's you're not going to have a huge margin. Now, we did have the Kemp Warnock voters back in 2022, and that's the group that I call the deciders. Theron hears me talk about the deciders all the time. Collins has got to have a message for those deciders. And so he's got to do several things. He's got to have a message for a positive future for America. And I think Phil was sort of alluding to that there. He's going to have to raise a lot of money because Ossoff already has over $80 million in the bank. And national Democrats will stop at nothing to defend that seat. They're one of their only handful of seats in the Deep South, him and Warnock. So they're going to do whatever it takes. And Collins also has to build a message on why Ossoff is an unacceptable alternative and needs to be fired. Against an incumbent, you must make the argument for why they should be fired. And that's now the main task of the Mike Collins campaign.
All right, I want to move on to the lieutenant governor's race. We just have a couple seconds here, where State Senator Greg Dolezal won the Republican nomination over John Kennedy, 54-46. There you see the numbers. For Democrats, it's State Senator Josh McLaurin, who defeated former State Senator Nabila Parks. Theron, what will you be watching in this race?
I mean, Josh McLaurin, congratulations to him. And also, I didn't congratulate Mike Collins. I'll congratulate him as well. Let's be as bipartisan as we can right now, because it's going to be very partisan going soon. But Josh ran a really good campaign. He ran an amazing campaign. He went across the state. He utilized digital, had a good message. But also Nabila Parks, who I believe is a young person in the party who will not, this won't be her last sort of thing. And I think the Stacey Abrams endorsement helped Josh McLaurin. It didn't help Dana Barrett as much, but it definitely helped him. So kudos to him. And I think those two individuals, him and Dolezal, are going to go at it. I mean, we're talking about the governor's race and the Senate race. These two guys are very witty. They're smart. And it's going to be some fireworks on that campaign.
So your observations quickly.
Right, just on the Republican side, I think Greg Dolezal ran a good Trumpian campaign and appealed to the base. And John Kennedy, I thought, who was a conservative, but he did not get on television until way late, which surprised me, and I think that hurt him.
All right, coming up, Republicans called a special session, then one of the most explosive items on the agenda got pulled. We'll discuss next.
The discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Georgia House Republicans went to the Capitol this week for a special session, then reversed course on redistricting. Speaker John Burns told Governor Kemp in a letter that the House would not redraw congressional or legislative maps this summer, citing pending litigation and political risk. Kemp had pushed hard for new maps, but several members of his own party shut him down. Kathy, Democrats are claiming a huge victory on this one.
It is a huge victory, and Kemp had a bad week, right? He was picking bad policies and people all over the place. I think, why on earth he would have decided right before an election to talk about redistricting and just get Democrats all unified and riled up is beyond me, but I think it's a good thing for Georgia. I've talked many times about how I think this hyper gerrymandering is just not good for the country. We should all have to earn our seats time and time again, and when you have people sitting in seats where there's just too much of one thing, Democrats or Republicans, we're not better off from it. So I'm glad that they took it down, but believe me, it'll be back in January and we'll have this fight all over again.
Brian?
Look, Republicans look really divided on this right now, but what we're not. We actually all agree that there needs to be redistricting because the Supreme Court changed the law of the land. And what we have now, Kathy, is gerrymandering that was forced on us by federal mandates that we have racially conscious districts. We were forced for the longest time to draw districts intended to elect black members to Congress or to the legislature. That required gerrymandering. This is actually something that gives us a lot more freedom. It returns to the state legislature one of the very few enumerated powers given to legislatures, and that is the power to draw districts as they see fit. And so now we get the chance to do that. You cannot use race as a consideration. That's what the court has said now, a reversal of what it used to be. Our maps in the applications, in the court cases, have said we used race-conscious decisions in drawing this so that black members could win. So they're not legal anymore. We've got to change them. The only division with Republicans is timing.
Kathy, then Theron, real quick.
Well, I just want to say real quick, we know right now that this state is split completely in half between Democrats and Republicans. It is time and again for the last few years. So let's draw maps where there are an equal number of Democrat and Republican seats to be able to win and take it that way. But that's not what's going to happen. We're going to be packing districts and shoving things around so there's even more Republican districts and put us way off where we were.
The Democrats never did that when they were in power.
We're not talking about what just happened. We're talking about what's happening next.
And look, what representation do Republicans in Illinois and Maryland and in New England have? They get drawn out of having any power too. Y'all want to make it about race.
Let's work it about. Let's make Georgia better than everybody else.
So let's talk about what happened on Wednesday. Democracy prevailed. You saw a group of organizers, legislators surround the speaker. And to Brian's point, Speaker Burns was also flanked by Larry Walker Jr., who's the pro tem in the Senate. And they came together to say, we're not going to do this now. So I want to commend all the Democrats, all the activists, all the organizations that showed up. But let me warn you all, listen to what they're saying and listen to what B. Rob is saying and what Phil is about to say. they're not saying that redistricting won't ever happen. It's just not going to happen in a special session. What the Republicans are focused on, there's been 80 bills that have been dropped that's going to deal with this e-host sort of situation, right? They try to do property taxes, and they believe that that issue is going to help Republicans in November. And so I want that same posture, I want that same amount of enthusiasm that Democrats and the activists shown on Wednesday to make sure we go out and vote. I believe that this could come back in November. I believe, to Kathy's point, it can come back in January. So a big victory to stop it from happening this session. But it was that look on Speaker Burns' face when he looked around the atrium. He saw all these people yelling, black votes matters, and I'm all with that. But this Republican Party knows that had that happened during the special session, it would have benefited Democrats. I told B-Rob, I had heard rumblings that Republicans were very scared. So I just want us to stay focused on the issue at hand, not get too comfortable. But it was a big victory on Wednesday.
And Phil, legislators are also trying to figure out this QR code on the ballots.
But I have to laugh. It was a big victory. The Republican leaders had already decided it. I don't know how you're reading facial expressions. They just said the timing
had
was wrong.
not decided. No.
Well, they're the ones who put it out there, and then they had to take it back.
They saw the polling, and they decided, like Brian says, the timing wasn't right. So it's going to be.
But it was
January.
outside pressure, Phil.
What was your question again?
Just about the QR codes they still have to figure out. Looks like a
that
delay.
is a mess. Real quickly, it is a mess. There's a bill by Senator Max Burns that would not abolish the QR code the way I've read it recently, and they were going to extend this thing, and they want to go shockingly, which a lot of Republicans and Democrats don't like. They now, Kathy, they don't want to go with hand-marked ballots. So they may be going with an electronic system. So I think on Monday we're going to see what happens. Maybe it should just die on the vine. That Burns bill is a bad bill.
All right, we'll be watching, and we'll be talking about it next week. Thanks, everybody. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right. Okay, Bill, we'll start with you. We should do the outtakes of the show today.
Losers. I want to just say a great leader we lost who was a winner, and that was Larry Walker Jr. He was a great statesman from Perry, Georgia, and he was actually House Majority Leader. And in your neck of the woods, your hometown of Athens, Dexter Fisher won the mayor's race against a socialist who was just horrible. So congratulations to Dexter. And, Theron and I were at the Georgia Press Association. It was their annual convention. Their winners, Jaylene Hunter, their executive director's a winner, and I won the debate against Theron.
Yeah, I was with you on everything you said until you won the debate. But
well, and I know Jaylene watches this show. You can't take both of them from me.
No, yeah.
We missed you guys.
But yeah, Georgia Press Association definitely winner, and also Dexter Fisher winner in Athens as well. Also, Lori, June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, so I just want to encourage all the men out there to make sure you deal with your mentals. Also, I met Jay and Becca at Bar Taco, and they go to church with B-Rob, and they did confirm that B-Rob does get to church as much as he can. So shout out to them for watching the show. And then happy Juneteenth to everyone out there. And then lastly, Laura went to Chicago and watched President Barack Obama and the beautiful woman, Michelle Obama, celebrate this new Obama Presidential Center. So hats off to them. It was just a great moment to be in Chicago.
I love to see the picture of them, all the former presidents together. Like, we all kind of reminisced about what that was like.
And Biden made it through okay, so I was happy about that. He made it through.
All right, Brian.
He was in good hands.
Well, first of all, happy birthday to our host, Lori Gary.
Yeah, we agree.
And
Thank you.
Here's to your birth.
Thank you. I'm a Juneteenth baby.
yes, we appreciate you so much. And on that score, happy Father's Day to Gordon Robinson. Love you, Dad. And losers, I would have to say, as much as I hate it, they were so fantastic all year. The Dogs baseball team, giving a heartbreaking loss in Omaha, but wow, what a season. SEC champs, SEC tournament champs. Congratulations, guys, even in this loss. And I want to say that the winner is the Republican Party for coming together the way that it did. We've got a big task ahead to take on Keisha Lance Bottoms and to keep this state moving in the right direction.
All right, I want to say a happy Father's Day to my dad, Leo Geary, so I know he's watching. And then we have a very important announcement today, and it's a tough one for us. This is Kathy's last Georgia gang. She's leaving us to head to greener pastures. I know. She's going to be continuing to travel all over the world. Kathy, You have been such an important part of this show.
Thank you.
You always come prepared, and even I get so many comments. Even when people disagree with you, they respect you so much, and it's going to be a big loss for us.
Well, thank you. It's really been fun. I'm getting to the part of my career where I don't care anymore. like that menopause lady who's like, we simply don't care. So now what you hear from me is what I think and how I try to live my life, and I've just really enjoyed getting to talk with you guys about it and spar, and people ask me how I can sit next to Phil, and I don't know how I do it. I'm really pretty amazing if you think about it, But
Such a nice person.
Yeah, but thank you. Thanks for having me on here. And let me just say my winners are Council members Liliana Bakhtiari and Kelsey Bond for voting against the mayor's TAD scheme, which is just going to redirect money into a bad place, and I'm glad they stood up, and that's my last word. And Brian Kemp's my loser because he just lost everything he touched in the last month or so.
All right.
Well, I want to say something really quickly. Happy birthday, Lori.
Thank
But also,
you.
Kathy, thank you. I remember the first conversation we had about this show. We talked about it. Lori was like, what do you think about Kathy? And you've been an exceptional addition to this, holding down the party, holding down the people you believe in. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to say you're one of my favorite Democrats, always pragmatic in your approach, which is what I am too. The city of Atlanta should have made you mayor. Huge loss.
Thank you.
And people were really surprised when we agreed on stuff.
I know. Well, that's shocking to
I
me.
had to
Even I have to go
reevaluate- I
home
had
and
to
lay down
reevaluate
after
my
that
position.
happens. Yeah, that's right.
Well, we're going to live through you now that you're going to be traveling the world. So best wishes to you.
Thanks so
All right.
much.
Thanks, everybody. Make it a great one. We'll see you next week.